Hi, it's me, Sonia, again. And actually, I was in touch with one of my old friends, Lisa Faith Casey, who lives in Fargo, North Dakota. She shares the same love of books and reading that I do. And at one point, I told her about a book that really inspired me. Actually, my father had read this a long time ago. I'm not sure if there's a movie about it, but anyway, it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So basically, what happened in the book was that it's kind of like a semi-autobiography of the author, but as done in fiction. That the author's son had died, and he goes on this quest throughout the United States on a motorcycle. He goes from one end of the country to the next, but looking deep inside at an inquiry into values, which is kind of what partially the title is. Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an Inquiry into Values. And he basically questions a lot of different things about life in general. He takes a very deep, hard look at life, and he starts asking himself a lot of philosophical questions, like whether ghosts exist, or say maybe somebody living in a rural area versus a city, how we would usually interpret the person being from city as being very sophisticated and very educated, and the guy from the rural area as a country bumpkin, but how he basically decides to package it, how he looks at it in a completely different way. And for me, this is one of my favorite books of that I have ever come across, outside of currently what I'm reading, which is Autobiography of a Yogi, and some of the Indian saints have to say about philosophy. But up till that point, this was basically my favorite book. So because of a little bit that I told this to my friend, she went ahead and she read it cover to cover, and she presented a brilliant essay. So actually, I'm going to be reading her essay. So this, please keep in mind, is not written by me. It is written by Lisa Faith Casey, and she has done a brilliant job of writing an essay. So I wanted to share that with you. So, timeless truths in the modern classic Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an inquiry into values, a mediocre title, she says. So this is a modern classic by former MSU Boson rhetoric professor, disillusioned ex-chemistry student turned avid philosophy critic. Robert Pirsig is true to life and somewhat sad social commentary, prosaicing, illustrating the perils of conformity to nonsensical norms. As he admits, rising the end of his biography, he spent a lifetime being beaten up for nonconformity. Pirsig is brilliant and an uncompromising idealist who insists on excellence, his own and from others. Through his teaching stint at MSU Bozen and attempted PhD studies in philosophy at the University of Chicago, and a contemplative motorcycle vacation through beloved Midwestern countryside, a middle-aged Pirsig, and psychologist Erik Erikson's life stage of generativity versus stagnation aims to define quality, which can be lived and taught to future generations. This was a pivotal social question of the turbulent hippie era, in which Pirsig taught while raising two children. Sometimes misunderstood as an antagonist, hence his self-identification of Phaedrus, Greek for wolf. Throughout the novel, Pirsig aspires only to be honest in all he does, and that those in his sphere of influence do the same. His first two separate fights for social justice occurred at MSU Bozeman over the school's accreditations violations and his own professional integrity. Regarding, excuse me, I just want to turn down the volume real quick of some music in the background. Thanks. So, anyway, regarding the first, Pirsig was labeled a troublemaker for protesting the school's continued accreditation as long as it continued its appalling violations. 1. Admitting all students over 21, regardless of high school diploma. 2. Deferring to corrupt legislation mandating an $8,000 fine for the school for each student not passed. These were right-wing policies. Passed shortly after Kennedy's assassination, some misguided students feared that he was trying to strip their education. His infamous Church of Reason lecture cleared the air. In it, he likens the university to a nearby abandoned church turned neon sign bar. The church didn't cease to exist because the building changed. It stopped when its purpose, members, religious fervor left. The real church was about its ideas and who uncompromisingly upheld them. So, it was with the university. The real university, he says, has no specific location. It owns no property, pays no salaries, and receives no material dues. The real university is a state of mind. It is the great heritage of rational thought that has been brought down to us through the centuries and which does not exist at any specific location. It is a state of mind which is regenerated throughout the centuries of a body of people who traditionally carry the title of professor, but even that title is not part of the real university. The real university is nothing less than the continuing body of reason itself. He goes on to note the duty of any real church is to maintain integrity at any cost. Sometimes trustees and/or legislators oppose the pastor's belief and try to manipulate leaders to compromise their teachings. Yet, while all professionals would like to keep their jobs, they're worthless if corrupted by politics opposing the good of those served. A true minister in such situations must act as though he's never heard the threats. His primary goal isn't to serve the members of the community, but always God. The primary goal of the Church of Reason, Phaedrus says, is always Socrates' old gold of truth, in its ever-changing forms as it's revealed by the process of rationality. Everything else is subordinate to that. Normally, this goal is in no conflict with the location goal of improving the citizenry, but on occasion, some conflicts arises, as in the case of Socrates himself. It arises when trustees and legislators who've contributed large amounts of time and money to the location take points of view in opposition to the professor's lectures or public statements. They can lean on administration, threatening to cut off funds if the professors don't say what they want to hear. True churchmen in such situations must act as though they've never heard these threats. Their primary goal never is to serve the community ahead of everyone else. The primary goal is to serve through reason, the goal of truth. Phaedrus escapes total condemnation from MSUB, partially because he refuses to support the college's enemy, but also because colleagues secretly respect him for daring to tell the rational truth. Personally, I also suspect Phaedrus gets away with the troublemaking, I bet carefully executed, because he's a man. The late 1950s to early 1960s occurred just before women's liberation, to which the Midwest is still slow to catch on. Additionally, the text hints at sexism within the department. Its only mention of a female colleague, Sarah, refers to her by first name. The only mention of her activity is that of her incessantly watering the plants in the professor's offices while asking Pirsig, though scornfully, if he's teaching quality. Sarah might have good ideas of her own, whether or not they agree with Pirsig's. But if she'd made an effort to share them, it's likely she'd meet the same fate as the ostracized female social justice advocates in contemporary film Thelma and Louise, to be tossed off a cliff and forgotten. Phaedrus' fight for universal quality, excellence, becomes problematic when he challenges the problems of the grading system while trying to define quality. He wants his students to learn to see quality, then combine this notion with original thought to produce well-crafted yet unique quality work. This backfires. His novice freshmen lack the academic background and life experience to know what they're supposed to learn in composition or how to do it well. They need the instructor's guidance, or they'll go crazy, as evidenced when one girl actually suffered a nervous breakdown. Hence, Phaedrus has a breakthrough, though he's almost anti-Aristotelian, preferring Plato's philosophy that truth equals good over mere knowledge. He realizes Aristotle's theological moral reasoning is needed to run a classroom. What was Phaedrus trying to do anyway? This question became more and more imperative as he went on. The answer had seemed right when he started now, made less and less sense. He wanted his students to become creative by deciding for themselves what was good writing instead of asking him all the time. The real purpose of withholding the grades was to force them to look within themselves. The only place they would ever get the right answer. But now this made no sense. If they already know what was good and bad, there would be no reason for them to take the course in the first place. The fact that they were there as students presumed that they did not know what was good or bad. This was his job as an instructor, to tell them what was good or bad. The whole idea of individual creativity and his expression in the classroom was really basically opposed to the whole idea of the university. For many of the students, this withholding created a catastrophic situation in which they saw they were to be punished for failures, to do something, but no one would tell them what they were supposed to do. They looked within themselves and saw nothing, and looked at Phaedrus and saw nothing, and just sat there, helpless, not knowing what to do. The vacuum was deadly. You have to provide some goal for a class to work toward that would fill that vacuum. This, he wasn't doing. Phaedrus released his libertarian philosophy and his trap or authoritarian dictatic teaching in frustration. He still sought to resolve his educational burden. How can you put on the blackboard the mysterious internal goal of each creative person? He discovered some good things could arise from his old by-the-book method, but it was not in spite of the instruction, not because of it. This ended up being as good as it got. Phaedrus eventually quit. He was ready to resign. Teaching dull conformity to hateful students wasn't what he wanted to do. Unfortunately, Phaedrus fails to find the perfect world, even in an ideal, seeming interdisciplinary PhD program at the University of Chicago about the examination of ideas. It combines his greatest interests: English, Eastern Oriental philosophy, and Greek, as is a one-of-a-kind up-and-coming curriculum. It seems fertile soil for planning his dissertation. Soon after, though, he's bullied by the fearsome department chairs over an ideals clash regarding how one deduces truth. He tries to keep Phaedrus out, although he fought for the admission others desired another one of his calm, yet firm, meticulous rebuttals. Phaedrus succeeds in school, though he gets admitted to the philosophy program rather than the ideas committee. Yet his search for truth, his search for quality, and desire to enlighten becomes stifled by the program's ironic emphasis on dull conformity to an outdated standard. Phaedrus quits, and also resigns permanently from teaching. He taught undergraduate freshman rhetoric at the University of Chicago at Navy Pier, with a monotonous crowd of C students. Phaedrus admitted he went through the motions. It was mere bread and butter work as he pursued his unscholarshiped interest through his PhD studies. After all that, Phaedrus didn't know what to do and began falling apart. This led to an ugly nervous breakdown, then forced confinement and electric shock therapy for 3 years at the state hospital. His failure to find a purposeful occupation which he could achieve his potential drove him mad. It led to total loss of freedom and property, as well as forced lobotomies, which permanently destroyed parts of his memory. Non-consensual ECTs, though a serious human rights violation, were still illegal in the 60s. To an extent, Pirsig had to understand he never had a perfect world, the sight of heaven, in which he didn't seem to believe. Successful living requires functioning effectively in the world as we find it, as noted by contemporary Christian psychologist John Townsend. That means taking the bad with the good, as the saying goes. Yet Pirsig sadly failed to find a place where he could be himself, to speak his truth. Social acceptance only came when he employed his social mask, the persona of Phaedrus, an outwardly calm, wise, authoritarian scholar who figured out to work the system, to have his career, house, horses, motorcycles, family, and social acquaintances. Outwardly bathed in middle-class comfort and status, he inwardly lived a life of quiet desperation. But the mask kept him employed, kept his freedom. While parts of Pirsig remain sadly broken, a reasonable degree of spiritual reconciliation occurs throughout the novel's end, primarily through the unexpected birth of an infant daughter. Now, Pirsig isn't prepared to be a parent in his 50s, but ends up welcoming his child, who he feels is a reincarnation of his murdered son, Chris. Pirsig was close to Chris, his miniature self in many ways, though some unresolved antagonism stood between them. The freshness of Nell's young life fills Chris' silence and gives Pirsig, now remired, a second chance at parenting. Pirsig had ultimately found more meaning in mentoring and loving his son than in his disillusioning temporal careers. He figured out family would last. Jobs and academia might not. Also, his decision to quit his PhD program, while disillusioning, ultimately birthed realizations he had achieved the learning he'd hoped for. He defined his dissertation, yet realized he could present it outside the confines of the university. That he did with all his internationally renowned novel, a quality work. He wanted the novel done right, or not at all. As he discusses in the interview section after the novel's close, once he found a zealous publisher, he was free to take time to craft his own project in a manner best suited for himself and his readers. Finally, a place to tell the world the truth. His ultimate peace came, ironically, before the ship out to the mental hospital. At that humbling, lonely moment, Pirsig was finally free to drop his social mask, Phaedrus, and to find a way to be himself in new circumstances. Gone were the pressures of conformity to a two-faced educational system which forced a schizophrenic-like split personality. Gone was a disappointment that he was only liked for his false self, largely disdained for his real identity. Through the lonely prison of the bleak mental hospital, he could seem to reconstruct his life, if only he could survive his inhumane loss of physical freedom and barbaric electric shock treatments. He felt a fragment of hope. But before help comes slowly, imperceptually at first, the entire consciousness of Phaedrus begins to fall apart, to dissolve and fade away. Then gradually, he no longer wonders what will happen next. He knows what will happen, and tears flow for his family, and for himself, and for the world. A fragment comes and lingers from an old Christian hymn. You've got to cross that lonesome valley. It carries him forward. You've got to cross it by yourself. It seems a Western hymn that belongs out in Montana. He crosses a lonesome valley, and the quality, the orate Greek for excellence, he has fought so hard for, has sacrificed for, has never betrayed, but in all the time has never once understood, now makes itself clear to him and his ideas. To him and his soul is at rest. Finally, his complete reconciliation to his son, who shares many of Pirsig's troubles, gives Pirsig a newfound deep-seated peace. Trials never end, of course. Unhappiness and misfortune are bound to occur as long as people live, but there is a feeling now that was not here before, and is not on the surface of things, but penetrates all the way through. We've won it. It's going to get better now. You can sort of tell these things. Furthermore, Neil teaches Pirsig that life goes on. Nell teaches aspects of parenthood never understood before. What is seen now so much more clearly is that although the names kept changing and the bodies keep changing, the larger pattern that holds us all together goes on and on. In terms of this bigger, larger pattern, the lines at the end of the book still stand. We have won. Things are better now. You can sort of tell these things. These issues plainly teach us timeless lessons for how we are to live. 1. Life is complicated, and not all situations have clear answers. But if we learn what we can from problems, grow, and learn how to go on with life, we have achieved at least some victory. 2. We can't have all the answers for how to live life. We could go nuts trying to figure it out. All we can do at any moment is the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time. 3. To succeed at life, a pleasurable life, one must accept that we live in a world where science and art are blended. Mechanical knowledge and technology itself are needed in order to know how to do day-to-day tasks and how to do jobs. Beauty is needed in order to give an appeal to our work and to life itself. Quality work is work that's both well-crafted and beautiful. 4. It behooves us to borrow ideas from at least several ancient philosophers to help us construct our own views. Aristotle had good ideas about technical knowledge and logic, Plato about beauty and truth, Kant about justice. One might favor one philosopher to a few or none, but becoming too narrow-minded hinders a needed ability in today's rapidly changing world to see unusual but legitimate possibilities. Conclusion. All I know is that this is a very rough draft. My brain is fried, and it's time for a glass of wine and a good trash novel. Lisa Faith ends this essay by saying, and I must say, that was very brilliantly written. And this was a book very close to my heart because of that search for truth, that search for quality that was eminent throughout the entire novel. And that he may have been deemed insane by the current society that he lived in. But nonetheless, what he had was a certain genius that if people had listened to him, the world would have really benefited from. Thank you.